On the fields of Adrianople in 378 AD, disaster struck the Eastern Roman Empire. Emperor Valens led his soldiers to battle the Goths, but error, pride, and betrayal would make the battlefield a graveyard. This was no ordinary loss. It was a tragedy that reshaped Rome's destiny and rocked the empire to its core. The Battle of Adrianople was about to change history forever. With the death of Emperor Valens' predecessor, the Eastern Roman Empire was experiencing unparalleled pressure along its Danube frontier. The Goths, displaced for the first time by the Huns, had escaped within Roman territory. Abuses, extortions, and famines converted desperation to rebellion. By the early months of 378 AD, tens of thousands of Goth men, women, and children were enclosed within Thrace, their patience thinned. Roman authorities asked for taxes and supplies, but when they were refused, tensions escalated. Valens, ambitious and proud emperor, had an opportunity for a swift military triumph to entrench his legacy. Despite Gothic power warnings from the Western Emperor Gratian, Valens became adamant about engaging the Goths without waiting for reinforcements. His army, numbering some 15,000 to 20,000 men, advanced on Adrianople in good humor, unaware of the disastrous ambush that awaited them in the dark forests. The stage was set, and history prepared to witness one of Rome's bloodiest routs. The Goths, divided into Tervings and Gruthungs, were taken advantage of by the Romans. Famine, sickness, and perpetual indignity hardened their resolve. Fritigern, a youthful, eloquent Gothic chieftain, arose to unite their broken groups. Unlike in previous wars with Rome, these Goths were no longer an ungoverned terror. They had learned about Roman tactics and sought vengeance. By the summer of 378 AD, the Gothic army numbered approximately 20,000 warriors, with many of them mounted, ready to take advantage of Roman vanity. Fritigern used cunning diplomatic tactics to delay Roman counterattacks, allowing him time to build up his forces. He also formed alliances with discontented Roman soldiers and native Thracian tribesmen, converting potential enemies into friends. The Goths fortified lines in the area around Adrianople, concealing their strength in the dense forests. They waited patiently, aware that the Roman eagerness to fight would soon be to their benefit. The stage was set, a haughty, arrogant Roman emperor against a desperate, cunning Gothic army. The judgment would shatter the myth of Roman invincibility. By mid-378 AD, Emperor Valens, fueled by ambition and impatience, marched from Constantinople to Adrianople. Despite the advice of Western Emperor Gratian, he believed that a quick strike would crush the Goths before all of them could be united. His army of some 15,000 to 20,000 men, consisting of heavy infantry, cavalry units, and auxiliaries, marched through the mountainous Thracian terrain. The roads were poor, the heat searing, and supplies limited, but Valens ignored these issues altogether. Scouts reported sightings of Gothic soldiers, but he dismissed them as minor threats. Each mile brought the Romans closer to disaster, as the Goths utilized the forests, hills, and river crossings to their benefit, controlling the battlefield. In late July, the Roman army reached the plains outside Adrianople. They set up camp, hoping the Goths would engage in an open conflict. They did not know that Fritigern had set a trap. The thick woods concealed tens of thousands of fighters, and the Gothic cavalry was ready to strike the flanks of the Romans. The Romans were on edge, even though the majority of the troops were not yet conscious that history would be writing this day down as one of the greatest Roman defeat. Valens' confidence blinded him to reality. His spies informed him of Gothic forces far in forests to the north and west of him, but Valens interpreted them as small detachments. He would not wait for Western reinforcements under Gratian, ignoring both Gothic numbers and will. On August 9th, 378 AD, Valens led his soldiers out onto the plains before Adrianople, confident that a devastating charge of horsemen would break the enemy. The Romans formed traditional alignments, infantry in tight wedges with cavalry on the flanks. Meanwhile, Fritigern stationed his cavalry to press the Roman flanks, and infantry concealed in the woods waited to receive the signal to attack. panic began to filter throughout the Roman ranks when the Gothic cavalry, with mounted archers, suddenly charged, enveloping the Roman right. Roman legions were unable to cope with an enemy that seemed to come from all sides at once. In a matter of hours, the well-organized Roman ranks started disintegrating. Panic, confusion, and miscommunication transformed order into confusion. Valens, having caught up too late with the risk, attempted to regroup his men, but the Gothic ambush was complete. The Empire had underestimated the Goths, and now the price would be paid in blood. On August 9th, 378 AD, the Battle of Adrianople began in earnest. Roman soldiers under Emperor Valens faced a cunningly concealed army of Goths. At early morning, Roman foot troops crossed open plains, expecting a formal battle. Fritigern's horsemen attacked the flanks with swift raids, and mounted bowmen rained arrows into the Roman ranks. A frantic fear spread rapidly as dust, smoke, and hooves echoed through the sky. Roman lines, once invincible, battled against an enemy who struck from all sides. The Gothic troops poured out of the dense forests, surrounding the weary Roman legionnaires. Valens attempted to hold his lines intact, but misapprehension and terror spread faster than any order could reach. Supposed sites of victory and opposite withdrawals created vast vacancies in the lines. Within hours, the battlefield was a maelstrom of chaos, blood, and fire. The Gothic trap, so skillfully baited over a period of many months, had paid off. Roman discipline was shaken, and the empire had received a blow from which it never recovered. Estimates by modern sources placed nearly 2/3 of the Eastern Roman forces, and Emperor Valens himself slain in the massacre. Amidst the confusion, Emperor Valens had sought to get his troops into motion and order a counterattack. Cut off by Gothic warriors, he fought valiantly, but was soon overwhelmed. According to Ammianus Marcellinus and other historians of his era, Valens refused to surrender, fighting to the death. His body was never recovered with certainty, and legend has him perishing inside a Roman camp that was afire or beneath a tempest of Gothic swords. The emperor decisively demoralized the rest of the Roman army, and further dissolution of the army ensued. Fritigern's army exploited every weakness, systematically disrupting the Roman formations. Whole legions vanished into the forests, captured or slaughtered. The news of defeat shook Constantinople and the empire and decisively initiated a shift in the balance of power. The Gothic victory at Adrianople demonstrated the vulnerability of Rome's borders and the power of barbarian armies once thought of as minor issues. The battle would plague Roman generals for decades to come, leading to a reassessment of strategy, diplomacy, and the empire's ability to control its borders. The sun had set on the scarred plains of Adrianople, leaving in its wake a legacy of destruction that would haunt the Eastern Roman Empire for the next few decades. 2/3 to as many as 10,000 to 15,000 of Valens' soldiers were estimated to have been killed, the rest fleeing in confusion. Emperor Valens' assassination created a power vacuum and sent Constantinople into a frenzy. Fritigern's Goths, newly emboldened, looted abandoned Roman camps and took supply. The Gothic victory was not so much military as psychological. Roman citizens, officials, and soldiers enjoyed the fact that their empire was open, and the threat of further barbarian invasions soon spread widely. Diplomatic attempts to negotiate the region failed, since the Goths were now perceived as a powerful, well-organized force rather than mere refugees. Fritigern wisely eschewed overextending his army, taking Thrace and leaving the Roman heartlands untouched, a conscious policy of putting survival and long-term benefit above mere pillage. Adrianople was the turning point. The myth of Roman invincibility was shattered, and the empire had to learn to live with a new reality. Barbarian powers could meet imperial power on open battlefields. In the aftermath of the disastrous Roman loss, Fritigern now focused on the placement of Goths in Thrace. Rather than focusing on extermination of what remained of Valens' army or laying siege to Constantinople, he focused his eye towards survival, supplies, and long-term security for his country. The Goths occupied abandoned fortresses, settled fertile lands, and incorporated disaffected Roman subjects. This prudent move allowed them to establish a semi-permanent foothold in Roman territories, setting the stage for future barbarian settlements inside the empire. Roman generals, meanwhile, were preoccupied with reconstituting forces, recruiting mercenaries, and shoring up border defenses. News of the defeat soon reached both eastern and western capitals, shattering faith in imperial military might. Adrianople forced Rome to recognize the Goths as an army and a political power, not an issue of refugees. The after effects of the battle echoed for decades, influencing military change, diplomacy, and the empire's behavior vis-à-vis foreign tribes. In essence, the Gothic victory at Adrianople opened a new era when Rome could no longer rely on reputation and traditional discipline to police the borders of the empire. News of the catastrophic defeat at Adrianople reached Constantinople with all due haste, sending the Eastern Roman Empire into panic. Citizens, senators, and generals were stunned. The unstoppable Roman army had been destroyed, and the emperor himself slain. The political vacuum spurred desperate activity. Empress Albia Dominica, advisors and generals hastened to secure the capital, reinforcing walls, mobilizing troops, and dispatching emissaries to Western Emperor Gratian for aid. The aftershocks of Adrianople shattered public faith and emboldened other barbarian peoples on the Danube frontier. Panic gripped the city, but Roman tenacity revealed itself in the plans of its leaders for restoration. Diplomatic missions were sent to treat with Gothic chiefs with the aim of purchasing peace, while the empire mobilized its forces anew. Adrianople had revealed an ugly truth. Rome could no longer rely on reputation and custom alone to police its frontiers. The empire was faced with the immediate necessity of reorganizing its army, pacifying Thrace, and confronting a growing brazen Gothic presence within the empire. The Adrianople disaster prompted the Eastern Roman Empire to rethink its military doctrine. Recruitment, field tactics, and frontier management were rethought. Roman generals began to use cavalry more effectively, having learned from the Gothic excellence in mobility and archery. The policy of admitting barbarian allies into the Roman military, both as federates and mercenaries, gained popularity as a practical expedient for manpower requirements. Defences on the Danube and Thrace were strengthened, roads were repaired for rapid troop movement, and lines of supply were reorganized. The psychological impact of Adrianople also led to greater emphasis on intelligence gathering, scouting, and reconnaissance to prevent ambushes. This period of reform was needed for Rome to maintain territorial integrity and hold on to imperial power. The empire learned, at a horrific cost, that hubris and the underestimation of enemies could lead to catastrophic results. And Adrianople was a textbook case of the importance of flexibility and vigilance in military planning. Following their overwhelming defeat, the Goths solidified control of Thrace. Fritigern did not wish to unnecessarily instigate the remaining Roman army, so he set to solidifying land, resources, and popular sentiment. Roman villages and fortresses left behind by retreating Romans were captured immediately. The Goths established semi-permanent camps and incorporated Thracian farmers into their communities and cultures, establishing reliable food supplies. They maintained mounted units in reserve to scout the plains, guard against counterattack, and raid in strategy when necessary. Psychological ramifications of their victory spread to Thrace. Local tribes and disaffected Romans recognized the Goths as a legitimate military and political power. This consolidation laid the foundation for future federate alliances with Rome. A course of action followed throughout the 5th century. Adrianople showed that a well-ordered, well-disciplined barbarian army not only could beat Rome in battle, but also could occupy and govern strategically important territories within imperial borders. After Adrianople, the Roman Empire fought to recover from a long, trying ordeal. The East's army needed to be rebuilt. Recruitment drives enlisted soldiers across the empire, mercenaries and federate barbarians who would fight for Rome. The Danube and Thrace fortifications were strengthened, and logistics were rearranged to respond swiftly to subsequent raids. Warlords favored intelligence collection, reconnaissance, and open formations to counter mobile enemies like the Goths. Politicians favored instead diplomatic solutions for preventing future immediate conflict, brokering truces and pacts to keep things at arm's length while Rome recovered. But the empire's survival was paid for in blood. The psychological shock of Adrianople stuck with it, and Rome's invincibility myth was forever shattered. Generals and historians would call this period a turning point, when strategic adaptation was necessary, and the incorporation of barbarian troops into Roman warfare and society became a matter of practical necessity. The Battle of Adrianople had widespread and lasting effects on the Eastern Roman Empire. The catastrophic defeat necessitated a re-evaluation of military, political, and social strategy. Roman reliance on heavy infantry was reconsidered, with cavalry and mobile forces gaining increasing prominence in later campaigns. Adrianople demonstrated the lethal effectiveness of barbarian troops if well organized and stimulated. Diplomacy with the Goths was now inevitable, as Rome could no longer rely upon intimidation alone. The battle also saw the dangers of pride. Valens' miscalculation regarding Fritigern's troops had led to unprecedented disaster. The loss had led to political unrest, weakened border defenses, and encouraged other bands of barbarians to settle along the empire frontiers. Adrianople was a turning point, exemplifying the balance of power that was shifting between Rome and the barbarian world. Historians to come would call it one of the greatest battles of late antiquity, one that set a precedent for future war that would eventually redefine the empire. Adrianople's influence extended far into the future of close military and political consequences. The battle shattered the legend of Roman invincibility, forcing the empire to alter both tactically and diplomatically. Gothic settlements in Roman territory became a model for federate treaties to be replicated across the empire. The defeat also influenced military reforms for decades, prioritizing intelligence, mobility through the cavalry, and adaptive formations. Roman emperors and generals would remember Adrianople as a lesson in hubris, underestimating enemies, and scouting. The psychological impact on Roman society was profound, altering the perceptions of invincibility and vulnerability of the empire. In 400 AD, lessons were learned at Adrianople. Rome had survived, but those days of uncontested dominance over barbarian peoples were finished. The conflict evolved into a watershed moment of late antiquity, which affected the relations of the empire with migrating tribes, as well as left its permanent mark on European history.